So you want to be an advocate. Thank you for coming to our webinar, What to Do Before You Head to the State House. I am your host and moderator. My name is J.M. Triplett the third. I serve as the Faith and Justice Organizer for Equality Ohio and OHMM, and I'm so glad that you're here today. Let's talk a little bit about our mission here at Ohio Health Modernization Movement. We are a coalition of organizations and individuals dedicated to ending the criminalization of HIV in Ohio. We are mobilizing a broad coalition, including individuals and communities who are disproportionately impacted by HIV, to replace fear-based, stigmatizing laws that criminalize HIV status with evidence-based, non-discriminatory laws that protect public health. Organizations that are a part of OHMM include AIDS Task Force of Greater Cleveland, AHF Ohio, Canopy, Caracol, Equality Ohio, Equitas Health, and the University of Toledo College of Medicine. The learning objectives for today. We want to gain an understanding of how Ohio's state law works and how legislation is presented, debated on, and signed into law. We also want to gain an understanding of how to best advocate for a cause to a lawmaker or their staff, learn the differences between Ohio's elected offices, municipal, state, and federal, and locate your local and state legislators using the tools from this webinar. Wanted to show you our hashtags. So if you are tweeting or taking photos or just taking notes on your social media, please tag us and add our hashtags. Also, you can go to our website at www.ohmodernizenow.org and join our cause to end HIV laws, HIV stigmatization laws in Ohio. Upcoming webinars coming up next month. Why did the OHMM push to introduce the HCR 39, recognized December 1st, 2021 as World AIDS Day? Come and learn about why we backed the resolution HCR 39 and why we take this route before introducing legislation to actually change the laws, and find out how you can help. The information will be sent out and also included in the chat today. Let's introduce our presenters today. One, we have Maria Bruno JD. Maria joined Equality Ohio in August 2021 as the Public Policy Director. Maria was born and raised in Medina, Ohio, and has spent their career working to protect underserved Ohioans' fundamental and civil rights. They is passionate about protecting the rights and livelihood of every Ohioan within the LGBTQ community. Maria received their JD from the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. They were named the Public Service Fellow with the Dean's highest honors, was a staff editor at the Ohio State Journal of Criminal Law, and received the Judge Joseph H. Harder Memorial Award for Trial Practice. They also received a BA with honors in political science with minors in economics, French, and Spanish from the University of Pittsburgh. We also have our very own Naima ONeil. Ms. Naima has over 11 years as an experienced professional with a long history of serving and advocating for people living with HIV and AIDS. A social worker with Circles Health Services, Ms. Naima served the AIDS Task Force of Greater Cleveland previously and has been an active member of the Cleveland TGA Part A Ryan White Planning Council since 2006. As an effective spokesperson and advocate with unwavering commitment to raising awareness around HIV and AIDS, Ms. Naima sets a stalwart example for co-chairing CLC and acting as an active participant on the Membership, Retention, and Marketing Committee, and also encourages volunteer engagement through practice. A problem solver and enthusiast working to improve service delivery for individuals living with HIV and AIDS in Cleveland TGA, Mrs. ONeil is also a widow, a mother of 2 daughters, and a grandmother of 2 granddaughters. At this time, I want to welcome Ms. ONeil to our cameras, and the floor.
Well, thank you for that introduction. In February. I'm gonna have to add mother of two or grandmother of two granddaughters plus a grandson because my daughter's expecting. So, welcome everyone. I'm glad to see everyone on this webinar. My portion of the webinar is to talk about my experience as advocate. I went to something called AIDS Watch through the AIDS, through the AIDS Funding Collaborative, but also through AIDS Watch or US. And I know AIDS United Healthcare. I think I apologize. I can't remember, but and my mind is racing, so forgive me. But my experience was to be trained in Washington. We went there for like a couple of days, and we learned what to expect when we talk to legislators. And so most of the time, you don't have the opportunity to speak to actual, like in Ohio, Portland. But you do get a chance to speak to their aide. So when you go, you're trained. And the reason that I was picked to go, because most of the time they have specific trustee, they have to sit and figure out how to best use the advocates that attend. And for me, they used me because I was a woman living with HIV, and I was also a woman of color. Plus, I was uh, heterosexual or a cisgender woman. And so all of those things helped in advocacy because most of the time they feel that HIV is still a gay white man's disease. And so when they see a woman of color who is also positive and sharing her story, that kind of makes them first gasp because they don't think that women are positive. And two, it also makes them listen because it's not the stereotypical person that is living with HIV. So those two reasons make me, for that reason, and that session made me able to go in and talk to my spokesperson. So you learn, you should know who your people are that are sitting in the office that are supposed to represent you. You should share your story because advocacy work is important because a lot of times we affect change at the top and then it trickles down to the people that we serve. So I enjoy being an advocate. I've had a lot of experience as being an advocate and sitting in front of, if not the legislator, in front of their office staff. And a lot of them are perceptive, and you have to be good to them because then they will share what they learn with the people that they serve. And so it's not, people will be like, well, I don't want to sit in front of them. I'm not going to do it unless I'm in front of the actual person. And that's not going to happen. So, and if that's what you want, that's not a realistic expectation because they're busy and they're always doing something. But you can sit in front of the senator's aide and still make an impact on asking them for what you're going into their office for. So I don't think I've ever went into anyone's office without discussing HIV and AIDS. But I do know that people lobby every day for different issues. So just do an issue that's important to you and go in and lobby because you voted that person in the office. And so you have a right to go and speak to that person because they're supposed to be representing you as they serve. Um, so I'm not sure. I know that it's something that needs to happen. In this history of the United States, that's how change happens because people get an idea and they go with it to go forth and make change. So if anyone has any questions, I can answer them at the end if you have something specific for me. I enjoy advocating. I started out self advocating, and you can get your patients or clients involved because it helped me to make HIV a part of my life and not my whole life. And so advocating was great, and it's something that I enjoy. So with that, I am going to pass.
Ms. Naima, thank you so much for sharing your story. We do appreciate it. And yes, as you saw in the chat, we will be using some of our tools today to look up in live time those who represent us. At this time, I'm going to open the floor for Ms. Maria and Mix Maria, and she's gonna go. They're gonna go ahead and do what needs to be done next. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, JM, and thank you for being my slide liaison for the presentation. I told JM I have like 100% history of screwing up the PowerPoint at some point in the presentation, so JM's going to save me from that. But yes, my name is Maria Bruno, and I'm the Public Policy Director at Equality Ohio. I use she, they pronouns. And I am going to give you all sort of the lessons that you probably learned in high school and haven't thought about since, just kind of how the government works. And then I'm going to, along the way, sort of tell you where the intervention points are at the state level, where you really can have conversations with your lawmakers and make a difference. So we're going to go over the levels of government and also the branches of government. So to start, I'm just doing a quick summary of the federal government. That is the US Congress, the President, and the Supreme Court. And if you want to go to the next slide, all three of the branches of government have these three branches. The federal government, the one that we spend a lot of time thinking about in public policy world, is the legislative branch, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate. And then the executive branch is the president and vice president, and the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. And so those three branches all have ways to limit the others' ability to take over the whole federal government. The idea is everybody has sort of co-equal powers, and they have different maneuvers to keep all of the other ones in check, which is, when it works, good. Doesn't always work. In Ohio, we have two senators that represent us statewide. That's Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman. And these are the people who they have a little bit more power than the House of Representatives, just because there are fewer senators. So their vote, is proportionally more. And each state has two, regardless of their population. Portman is not running for re-election, which means the crazy Senate race that's happening is for his seat to take that spot. So we will find out in November who our next senator will be. Go vote, go get involved in the election. And then we have our U.S. House of Representatives. Those are 2-year terms. That's the other reason they're a little less powerful, is because they have to get reelected so frequently. We have 16 now, but Ohio's shrinking population means that we're going to go down to 15 once the new maps finally go through. So these little squiggly, this picture that you're seeing, this is one of the maps that all of the hoopla about the redistricting, the court cases, and the public policy fight that I'm sure at least some of you have heard about, that's over these maps. And these determine who basically serves as your liaison to the federal government. And so when they don't match what your communities actually look like, your liaison ends up being someone that doesn't necessarily have much in common with you. The local government is where a lot of the day-to-day stuff happens. That's the city council, the mayor, the local courts, also county commissioners. And those are primarily service-oriented decision-making. But that's also like what you walk outside your door and are usually annoyed about. It's usually a local decision level. That includes park and rec services, the police and fire departments, housing services, emergency medical services, the local courts, municipal and county, transportation services, and public works. And they are massively undercommunicated to. So it is often the case that getting involved at the local level can be very powerful because not many people are paying attention. And so one voice, is louder. And they also get money from the state and federal government to run these programs. The bulk of this presentation, though, is going to be about the state government, which is what I interact with most, and is really, really important in our lives and really, really paid attention to, I guess, for lack of better words. But the state legislative, executive, and judicial, that's the state legislator, the state house, and the state senate. And the governor is the executive, and the governor also has several agencies. They have their cabinet, so to speak. There are a couple other elected spots, and the rest are appointed by the governor. So the elected spots are the Secretary of State, the recorder, the auditor, and a fifth one, treasurer. And the rest are appointed by the governor. And then we have the state level courts. Again, just to bring it back to the redistricting hoopla, the maps or the lawsuit about the maps that people are waiting on the results from is the state highest court. So, friendly reminder, again, I'm sure you learned this at some point in your life and haven't thought about it much since. The legislative branch is in charge with making laws. The executive branch actually carries those laws out, and the judicial branch interpret laws. That's true across all levels of the government. At the state level, what that means is these executive branches, this cabinet that I just mentioned, and then they will basically approve, up, down, vote what the legislature passes. But the state agencies run a lot of the programming. So especially when you're working with underserved communities, a lot of that programming comes from work through the agencies, which get money from the legislature. The legislatures, the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate, they draft bills, pass bills, and most importantly, recently draw the congressional districts. And then the judicial branch is same as always. It decides on the constitutionality of various laws. And so they are kind of like the gatekeeper between a law and whether or not it fits within the boundaries of what the state government is even allowed to legislate about. And then they also hear appeals from the lower courts. So the General Assembly in Ohio, there are 99 members of the House of Representatives, and there are 33 members of the Senate. The House has 2-year terms. The Senate has 4-year terms. Both have term limits. They can only run 2 consecutively. So a lot of legislators will go from one chamber to the other. They'll run for Senate twice and then they'll run for the House, or vice versa. And so people get confused, and there's a lot of representative that misspeak that happens just because that rotation does tend to happen. And so they'll introduce bills, they'll sponsor bills, and they'll often do that at the same time in both chambers just to keep the process expeditious. So instead of having to get public attention for 3 weeks while 10 other things are going on, they both focus on this topic, this bill, for a couple weeks and get something through. That doesn't always happen though, and so sometimes it is really one bill is just carried through on one side and then moves to the other side. All right, so State House leadership. I'm not going to read them to you, but we will, I hope, circulate the slides after this, and you can look them up very easily. There's actually Wikipedia pages, so you can actually go in and just, use the Google. But these are your leadership at the State House. And what that means is they're kind of in charge with deciding on and carrying out the agenda for that party. So the legislators, as you might expect, tend to vote in sort of teams. Republican and Democrat. The Republican team captains are the majority leadership. The Democrat team captains are the minority leadership. Right now, the Republicans have a supermajority in both this House and the Senate, which makes it pretty hard for the minority leadership to have much of a say in much. But nonetheless, these are the people that will decide on the agenda for better or worse for those folks. So these people in these red columns are particularly powerful. When you're talking about a bill or thinking about a bill or deciding how to get involved, who should you even be speaking to? Your state and state representative and senator are both meant to be your liaison to the state house. So you can always contact them with your concerns and say, just as a constituent, this is what matters to me. Party leadership, as I mentioned, has control over the agenda. So sometimes talking to them can be powerful in getting them either to cool down on something that you think is harmful or to speed up if there's something that you think is particularly beneficial. And we will take a second to actually look at the website, and I'll show you how to look up who represents you too. So there will be time for that. And so you can also talk to committee chairs and committee members, and I'm about to explain what the heck that even means. But basically, there are just subject matter-based committees that exist in the State House. And those committees are very powerful because that's actually where all of the details get sorted out. The committees, there are both House and Senate committees. The chairs are appointed by that team captain, the leadership. And so those chairs get to decide on basically the agenda of the committee. And I'm gonna, in a couple slides, go over the process of how those actually move. And the committee chairs will decide whether that process stops or keeps going. So it's a very important gatekeeper. So again, talking to that person, getting them to understand your issue and why it matters is very helpful. There's also a vice chair who's also influential, has a little bit more say than the rest of the committee members. And also the committees are not that big. So you can look up your committee members. If you have a legislator that is your legislator and also is on that committee, that's like bonus. But you can talk to any of those folks. I didn't do these colors weird just because I felt like it. There is sort of a method to the madness, which is the stuff in green is stuff that doesn't necessarily have to happen. Once you get to certain spots, it can just basically like expire on the shelf if it doesn't move. So a bill will start out in one of the chambers. And again, sometimes, like I said, there will be twin bills that go on both sides of the chambers. Not always, but sometimes. They'll have different bill numbers, which is often confusing. And so immediately upon being introduced, it will be referred to a committee. So that committee, that becomes the jurisdiction of the committee chair and the committee members. That happens immediately. And then there could be a sponsor hearing. And in theory, there's supposed to be opportunity for then a proponent hearing and an opponent hearing to hear the stakeholders come and testify. So if you all write testimony, that's when that will happen in that hearing room. Sometimes they will do that all sort of in one of the chambers and then again tease out those issues in one chamber and then move it along. Sometimes they'll do it in both and end up with different results. Ultimately, both chambers need to pass both bills or pass the same bill. So if something gets changed along the way, the other side has to okay it before it moves forward. So the bill must pass majority vote out of the committee and then majority vote out of the chamber altogether. And then it gets sent to the governor. And the governor has a few options. He can veto it, which just means it's dead. He can partially line item veto is what it's called. That'll be, I just don't like this part. I'm just going to take out this line. The rest is okay and signs into law. Or just can sign it without changing anything, or he can do nothing. And if he does nothing, it still becomes law after 15 days. So you can't just he can't really stop it from moving unless he actually vetoes it. And then the legislature can override the veto with a 3/5 majority. So when I say supermajority, I mean they have the ability to override a veto. So they have extra power right now because if they really get mad enough at the governor about something that he stops, they can actually just say, nope, it's going to keep going anyway. And it goes to law. So how that looks a little bit wonkier. This is kind of like the zoomed in timeline on actual when a bill is birthed, so to speak. So if you have just an idea and you want something to happen, in theory, and that isn't really how it works. Often there is draft language from another state that you like, or you already have a legislator that is interested in doing this. It's a pretty steep hill to climb to just kind of take in one of your ideas and turn it into law, but it can be done technically. And so what you would do is find a sponsor. You find a legislator who also cares about this issue, get them to introduce your ideas. What that means is they'll ask the LSC, which is they're all of the, and I use this term affectionately, they're all the nerds that write the legislation and like pay attention to the small details in the words. And again, I love nerds, so this is a compliment. But those folks, you have to have a legislator ask them to do that. And so the sponsor will ask the Geek Squad, so to speak, to put the language together. And then the sponsor, once they have that language, they can get other legislators on board and they can introduce it and start this timeline. Often they will do a lot of behind the scenes corralling to get people on board before they've even introduced it, so that they can even have a more powerful introduction by having 20 people introduce it at once rather than one. So once you have someone to sponsor it, they will introduce the bill, and the bipartisan bills that are introduced often get more attention because it's such a novel idea for Republicans and Democrats to get along these days. And so it tends to have a little bit of extra immediate impact. So it will move to the committee right away, and then the committee chair can sit on it or can keep going. The terms for a live bill is 2 years. So we are in the 134th session, General Assembly right now, and that's a 2-year period. And so once the bill is introduced within this General Assembly, 134th, it has 2 years to get through the process. Not 2 years, it's before January 2023. Yes. Then the clock starts over. Whatever is mid-process gets wiped away, you have to start over. And so committee chairs in theory can stop once they have the bill. They can just hold it for that whole period, or they can keep it moving. And then once they decide to keep it moving, they can decide to move it really quickly, or take their time and have a longer public debate about the substance of the bill. The hearings are also where the other committee members might introduce an amendment. So if there's like a particular language that you're super concerned about, it would maybe do more than the bill intended to do. It's just, it's too broad of language or something. They would introduce an amendment there to clarify that language and to perfect that bill before they pass it out. And then once it's to the floor, you do have an opportunity for floor speeches, but really the decisions have been made by then. And so the intervention really happens in these early committee stages. Okay, so now we're going to look up our legislators, and I'm going to show you how to use this website just kind of briefly. As you can see, actually, I'm kind of impressed with their interface. I hadn't looked at it this closely in a while, but it's pretty straightforward. If you want to look at schedules, there's a schedule link, there's a legislation link, legislator, committees, session, budget, laws. So you can pretty much just, follow the yellow brick road to whatever you need. But right on their front page, they have a way to look up who represents you, and they have a way to look up legislation. And I'm just going to go really quickly over both of those two. The first is going to be the who represents me. So go in there. If you can go to legislature.ohio.gov, it's in big letters at the top of the screen. Actually go to that right now. Look up who your legislators are. Just plug in your address. And then if you want to pop them in the chat, I think a few of you have. But go ahead and pop them in chat once you look it up. And you should see this ultimately. These are my representatives. But ultimately, you will get this screen and you'll get a nice little map of who your legislator is. And while you're doing that, I just will also mention, back to the redistricting process, the other set of maps that people are fighting over right now are these maps. These squiggly districts that you see. Those are being redrawn. They're redrawn every 10 years after the census is done, so they adjust for population. I mentioned earlier, we have a shrinking population. We're losing one of the federal districts, so they have to draw that district out. At the local level, or at the state level, there will always be these same number, but they will be redivvied up based on population shifts. So obviously, you know, like the city centers are a lot smaller because there's a lot more people living in a much more condensed space. So those squiggly lines are what everyone's studying about. Your zip code actually might be split, and this is back to gerrymandering. That's one of those things that makes it complicated. So if you only put your zip code, you might have the whole zip code covered, which would include your territory, but it's also, there's another one in a different part of that zip code. So I kind of am annoyed that they even have you look it up that way because it doesn't really work, but that's probably what's happening. So next, we're gonna search legislation, and I'm gonna show you what you're gonna see, and then you're gonna go do it. And everyone has a slightly different assignment. So this yellow box here, you're gonna search the bill number that you're looking for. You can also search keywords. Just as an example, I just did keyword HIV. If you don't know a bill number, but you know that it covers HIV, you could just add HIV and you'd get a list, and you could maybe find the one that you are looking for. Again, all of these lists are the ones that have been introduced in this General Assembly. So these are live, not yet squashed bills. They're all either passed or introduced. And so you can see in that status what the different statuses are. So once you get to the bill, you'll click on the bill number and you'll see this page. And you get a lot of information out of this page. And the weird yellow box at the bottom of the screen is just kind of a call out box to the co-sponsor list that I didn't feel like figuring out how to crop. But right below the primary sponsor, there will be a list of co-sponsors. The co-sponsors are the people. The primary sponsor is the person who went out of their way to draft the language, you know, actually did the work behind the scenes. The co-sponsors are the people who showed up and they said, hey, do you support this too? And they said, yes, I do. And they get on. And so that is how that list is formed. Ideally, that co-sponsor list is bipartisan. So you can go see what committee it was sent to, and then we kick off that committee process that we just talked about, where you're then going to find out who the chair is and find out who's on the committee, and then reach out to them and talk to them about your concerns. And there are some other, if you look at this summary, document status, votes, committee activity box in the upper right-hand corner, that tells you everything about this specific piece of legislation that's available. That won't always be all of the things, by the way. Some of the documents, especially if it's a really complex bill, will have a bunch of documents. Sometimes it will have the language, which is a half a page long, and that's just all they have. So I actually used another example to show you, which I used the Ohio Fairness Act, to show you the documents tab. You will have, for some bills, especially the complicated ones or the longer ones, is an analysis. And this is kind of your like cheat sheet. It's really nice when you have these. And so if you are looking for legislation, and if you click the actual legislation, that will show you the bill text, but it'll be really wonky and it'll be formatted weird. And this just has a summary and just says, here's what this does. So they're really nice. Now you're gonna try. You're gonna use your age, or the age of your soul, or your aspirational age. I don't really care, that's not really the point. Use that number and search for the Senate and the House bills of that number. So for instance, if you're 30, you'll look up SB 30 and HB 30. And then there should be a short title, and look for the short title, and if there's a bill analysis, see if you can figure out what the bill does, if they have a little summary on it, and then just put, designated World AIDS Day, and that's the short title, and then, makes December 1st World AIDS Day a state recognized holiday or whatever. And so if you can figure that out quickly, we'll give a couple minutes to do that. Just a reminder, so go to legislature.ohio.gov, search for the bill number, that is your age, and there will be no space between SB and HB and the number when you're searching. And then see if they have an analysis for that bill. And once you have a chance to look that up, go ahead and drop it in the chat. So when you're meeting with lawmakers, there are some things to think about, and it's almost kind of like a formula that is a good way to suss out what conversations make sense to have. And that will be combining the purpose of the interaction with the audience, with the messenger, to ultimately get to the best message. And I'll go over what that means. So what's the purpose of this conversation? Whenever you're going to meet with a lawmaker, there are a variety of things that you can be trying to do, and they're all valid. There's no real, value judgment in deciding which one it is. It's just, this helps frame what you need to make sure that you talk about during the meeting. So is it to educate? Is it to persuade? Is it just to give an update? Is it to get information from them, to strategize together, to thank a legislator for doing things, or just to build a relationship in general? All of these are completely valid reasons, but you're also probably going to talk about way different stuff depending on what it is. When you're thinking about the audience, think about the political disposition of the lawmaker. Your values are probably very overlapped with theirs and also probably look a lot different. So you need to be thinking about there we go, thank you. And so you need to be thinking about the terms in which they are framing the information. Also, familiarity with the topic. I think especially when you have one issue that you work on all the time, you can assume other people know more about something than they do. That's not an intelligence thing, that's just a familiarity with your topic. And so knowing what level the lawmaker is coming in on is really helpful, so you can make sure that you're rewinding enough, but also not giving, wasting precious time on the foundational things that they already understand. Figure out what types of issues they're drawn to. Often they will have sort of a soft spot or pet interest. Sometimes they will have an area that they're really focusing on. And that allows you to make the connection between whatever you're asking for and whatever they're already thinking about. The rank in the office or the relationship, the decision maker. So you won't always meet with the actual lawmaker. You also, especially during campaign season, could be meeting with a surrogate who's not even necessarily a technical employee, but like a representative. Sometimes they'll fill in at forums, for example. But who is the person what's the person who you're talking to's relationship to the decision maker? Sometimes it is the decision maker, sometimes it's their best friend. And you will approach those conversations potentially differently, because you have to get the friend to care about something enough to proactively go seek out the decision maker and change their mind or get them to do something. And so the expectation is that you need to be a little bit even extra persuasive if you're talking to someone who is not the direct person doing the up-down vote. Timing in the election cycle is really important. If they are about to go through a primary election, that is when they are most incentivized to pass legislation that is in line with the priorities of their party. On the right, that's not very helpful for us generally on our issues. There are some areas though where you might find unexpected overlap. Criminal justice reform is the one that comes to mind. Criminal justice reform is something that both sides have taken an interest in. So you often can get some folks who are active in that area to think about issues when they pertain or tie to criminal justice. And that's also the type of areas that you're drawn to that, is a similar thing, but knowing where they are in the election cycle. So if they're about to go through a primary, they're really caring about what their base thinks about them right now. If they're in a general election cycle, it can mean, but does not always mean, that they will be courting the middle or whatever is left of the middle right now. And they are going to be trying to get people over to their side. They need to win a general election against someone who's providing a competing vision. That's when they're probably going to be the folks who lean right. That's where those folks are going to be most approachable, is when they're going through a general election cycle. That being said, many of these districts are super safe and they don't actually have to worry that much about being able to be reelected regardless. And so those folks might remain unaffected. There are different types of advocates. There are paid lobbyists. These are people who their full-time job is to talk to lawmakers, and they might have 20 different clients who all have different things that they need from lawmakers and different areas of interest of the law that they care about. The lobbyist will monitor all of those areas They run the same kind of conflict of interest checks that like a lawyer might run, right? So they can't be representing competing interests for obvious reasons, but they will sort of have a specific pet interest that they're hired for from an organization. That could be a company, that could be a nonprofit. And so those folks, that's their full-time job. Nonprofit policy professional, that's me. Those are the people who spend all day, every day with whatever issue we're talking about. So whatever that issue that nonprofit works on, that nonprofit policy professional is in charge of that issue on kind of a wholesale level. So anything that impacts whether it's a community or an issue, for us, it's a community. Anything that really impacts LGBTQ people is fair game. That's something that affects the folks that we represent. And so I'll talk all day for that. And if you ask me about anything, I probably won't be in the know because it's not my area. Whereas the paid lobbyists will probably know, they know a lot more of the pieces because they have broader territory to cover. But we are the ones that will be talking to the community members, the coalition partners, other stakeholders, often the media. The lobbyists are not going to give media interviews. That's the nonprofits themselves who are making a firm public stance about their priorities. And also the community. So we are the ones that are accountable to the community. The paid lobbyists are whoever, writes their checks. For us, it is the people that we serve. There are also varying types of nonprofits, 501c4 nonprofits. That, just a side note, if you have heard about the HB6 scandal, you should Google it if you haven't. But that involves C4 organizations because they don't have to say who funds them. They also are allowed to do more lobbying. 501c3 organizations are primarily service organizations. They can do a limited amount of lobbying directly to lawmakers, but their primary purpose remains a public service rather than a political interest. And then there's community advocates who have relevant lived experience or are just, generally active with community organizations on this issue, have a particular interest in it. This can be anything. Anyone can be a community advocate, but the best community advocate are people who have lived experience on the issue that you're talking about. These people are, yes, Naima is a perfect example of a community advocate. She uses her lived experience to teach people with less exposure to this issue why it truly impacts their life, why it matters, and why it's the obligation of the lawmaker to act on it. And the constituent then is just really anyone that lives in the legislator's district, regardless of their relationship to that issue. They are represented by that lawmaker, and they have the right to tell them what they think on all the issues that the lawmaker is working on. And so those are the different types of advocates. The best arrangement is usually a combo. And again, it's not always everybody. There are different purposes to different meetings. Sometimes, again, back to the purpose of the meeting, that first one was, is it to educate? Is it to persuade? Is it to strategize? And depending on what the purpose of it is, it's who makes sense in the conversation. For example, we always make sure that a nonprofit policy professional is in there if a community advocate is in there or a constituent is in there, because we know that this is not their full-time job. And we also know that there are potential bad faith actors involved in the situation. Not always and not normally. Like usually it is a pleasant conversation regardless of how much you care about this issue. But we do feel very protective over the communities that we serve, and we are not going to comfortably throw them into a potentially hostile situation and just sink or swim, right? So we will make sure to be there as any sort of extra subject matter things can be, that are a little wonkier. We can fill in the gaps there, and we can also just make sure that community advocate has an active supporter and ally right next to them at the table. And this is a scheduled appointment. Thank you, Kim. And this messaging sort of framework really kind of works regardless of whether you're meeting a lawmaker in an elevator or a formal meeting. You just have a lot more time to think about the different pieces of it when it's a formal meeting. So when you're thinking about what the message is, you're thinking about how these pieces combine together. How can you bond? How can the person who's coming to the meeting or the conversation bond with that lawmaker? What can you agree on? What are some shared values? Focus on what that is and then frame your message around that. Why should the lawmaker care about this issue? Why should this be a priority? And really, in doing this, you should assume that the lawmaker is an entirely selfish actor. It's not, that's not even me making like a moral judgment. I just mean from like a strategic perspective, they're more likely to act if they think it's also in their own best interest. And so just assume that the lawmaker is an entirely selfish actor and figure out what pitch you could make to make that selfish actor care about your issue. So the best messenger does also matter for purposes of the ability to get appointments and getting the ear of the lawmaker. That's actually the other reason it's nice to pair a nonprofit professional with a community advocate, is because the nonprofit professional often will have an easier time getting into the conversation at all. We'll know when and where it's happening, and we'll be able to probably already have a relationship with that office because we work on this all the time in the world. And sometimes you have to know a staffer to kind of get priority on a lawmaker schedule. It shouldn't be that way. It should be open to everyone, but it is that way. And so the least that we can do as a nonprofit is leverage our relationships to make sure that community members are getting face time directly with lawmakers. And then the last consideration to pieces to put together are the messenger and the purpose, which is, why are you an authority on this topic? Again, maybe it's because you live in the district. Maybe it's because you have lived experience. Maybe it's because you have subject matter expertise. But find why they should listen to you on this topic. So the constituent can call and set up an appointment, and the nonprofit professional, for example, can email the staffer that they met at that event 6 months ago and say, hey, we're really trying to get the constituent to be able to have the opportunity to speak with this lawmaker. Can we make that happen? And so usually those both together will get it bumped a little bit quicker to the priority list. And different lawmakers are different. Some are easy to get in with, and some have a waiting list, and some won't be responsive, and that's just how we work on it. Yep. So just like general reminders, practice your story, practice the hardest thing is distilling the information down. So keep making it shorter and shorter and shorter. And once you have your elevator speech down, you're good, but you have to work on that specifically so that you can, again, use every moment that you have with that lawmaker. If you have literature or resources, great. They're not going to read anything super long. So like think picture book, not like, research paper. And so make sure that the resources are appropriate and are actually going to be useful. And then do your homework on the lawmaker. Lawmakers are people, for better or worse. They'll have personal biases, but they care about something. Be honest. If you don't know, that's okay. You can get back to them. Like you can say like, I'll look that up and I'll email you the answer. That's okay. Or just not knowing and be like, I don't think that's not really what my area is. It's okay. And if you make a mistake, just correct yourself. And we are here to help. We do this all the time. And so we are happy to help folks get comfortable with this process and prepare. And then relationships move at the speed of trust, which means, why should we listen to you? You get more bees with honey. Also, if they know who you are, some people are just really, really active, and the lawmakers know them. They're like, hi, Carol, it's good to see you again. They'll get to know you if you make yourself seen enough. So sometimes you can just meet them to show them that you're watching and paying attention. And also know that a lot of other people are giving them feedback and asking them to do stuff. So just remember who else is whispering in their ear, why that might impact how they view the information, and what you can maybe do to make sure that your message is as powerful as it can be. Okay, so following up with the lawmaker, you can connect them with other people. So again, back to the nonprofit professionals, we will often connect lawmakers with constituents or with people with lived experience so that they can talk to someone who is affected community member directly, and we will facilitate that. Is there any other information that you can follow up with? Again, back to never making stuff up. This is when you could email them the study that you referenced when you were talking to them, or get them the stat that they specifically requested. And then from yourself, think about how you can make it as easy as possible for that lawmaker to do whatever it is you need them to do. If you need to draft questions so that they can appropriately hound another witness in a hearing, hound is the wrong word, but ask them, challenge, some misinformation, for example, write those talking points, write the questions, send them to them. And then also see, they are around these folks all the time, these around these issues all the time. They often have insights, they often have knowledge they're willing to share, especially if they are people that would like to help. But there are ways to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. And then leave literature if that is the appropriate thing to do. And then last slide, I know I'm running out of time. If you don't want to meet with lawmakers directly, there are written ways to get involved as well. You can write personal testimony and do writing only. You can also write an opinion piece or a letter to the editor. We want to hear your story, and you can present that story in a bunch of different ways.
Well, awesome, and thank everyone for joining us today. Maria, thank you so much. Naima, thank you so much. I want to make sure that if you need more information about this, please reach out to Kim at ohmodernizenow.org. And there's a physical address as well. We ask that you don't reach out to anyone on social media. Reach out to us and we'll get you connected squared away. Thank you again for the wonderful time that we had today. Hope you got something out of it. Look forward to us next year. And